Good morning all. I'd like to welcome my panel onto the stage, please. So Rita Allen. And Javed Farouk. Mohammed Tambos. Barry Wormald. And Philippe Bacos. Thank you very much. So perhaps you'd like to quickly introduce yourself, Mohammed, just for the benefit of the audience.
Good morning. I'm Mohammed Tambuz, Executive Director Operations at La Casa Architects and Engineering Consultants. We're here in Dubai since 2006. And myself, I have 30 years of experience in the design and construction field. And hopefully we have some good input to share today.
I'm sure. Rita?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rita Allen. I'm a Senior Associate at Pinsent Masons. We were delighted to win the Energy and Infrastructure Law Firm of the Year award a couple of weeks ago. And personally, I've spent nearly a decade in the UK working on PPP and PFI projects in the school and healthcare sector. I'm delighted to see that there's real movement in that direction in this region as well. So,
fantastic.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Javed Farouk. I'm the Vice President and Director for Risk and Strategy for Parsons. I've been in the region about 10 years now. I hold a number of positions, but one of them is primarily the SME for PPPs across the Middle East region. I've been involved in numerous design, build, fund, operate PPP schemes, both in the UK and in the Middle East.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Philippe Bacos. I'm a construction expert at Etihad Rail. I came to the region here in 2008 and working for Sistra. Then I moved to Etihad Rail in 2010. So it's been 9 years I work for this company. And I'm very happy because I've seen it growing from the planning stage to the engineering and now to the construction.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Barry Wormald. I'm Director of Building Performance at ASG, or a specialist consulting company. I first worked in the Middle East in this region in the early 80s. Spent about 7 years, moved to Australia, worked in the UK. The last 7 years before moving here, I was in India, where there are a lot of PPP projects. I'm glad we've got some experts on PPP here. My field of expertise is hopefully on the value engineering side.
Fantastic, and thank you very much. Now then, panel, it's been to open it up really. Question I'd quite like to ask everyone is, PPPs by definition should really encourage value engineering by contract, by rollouts. I mean, perhaps Rita, you want to start the ball rolling with what's your thoughts on that?
yes, I think the word partnership is the biggest clue there, but a part of that process is defined by the structure that a typical PPP project would run through. And the most important one of those is really early and active stakeholder engagement, which involves incorporation of the various requirements of the clients, but also the end users. And the difficulties, I think, for this region is that there's a relatively immature PPP sector and a relatively low level of understanding by the participants of what those PPP steps and processes really are. The other thing that I think it leads to is a recognition of the value of the experience already held. The reality is that there's a lot of projects here that, perhaps not by name, but by level of cooperation, are in some form a partnership between public and private entities already. So we see that in the power and water sector, and that some of those lessons learned can equally be applied to new development sectors. And a careful consideration needs to be given to the kind of areas within the community infrastructure sector where PPP is both best suited and those where it might not be suited. And from a contractual lawyer's perspective, that leads to the next point, which is that not all PPPs are created equal, and indeed what can be termed a PPP can be delivered under very different contractual models depending on the type of procurement that is required and the end result that is sought to be achieved. So we all have different experiences on the panel of what that should mean, but the most important thing that it comes down to is clear communication and engagement throughout in a flexible manner.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose you talk about a variety of different public-private type engagements. I mean, Philippe's got a pretty good example in so much as it's not necessarily a PPP per se, but your stage one is a good example that you might wish to tell the audience about, because you were just discussing that with me earlier.
Exactly. So on Etihad Rail stage one, before we choose the railway solution was chosen, there were different options that were studied between, at the time, Etihad Rail's team and the Union Railway team, a very small team, and ADNOC, to agree the best way to transport the sulfur from Shah Habshan to Ruwais. Yeah, so basically there was some comparison between a pipeline solution, a truck solution, current one, and the railway. So there was some kind of value engineering works done in coordination with the ultimate client. So basically, this, before this railway solution was chosen. And so all the criteria were taken into account, including the operation of the railway, which constitute the big difference, in my opinion, between the design and build and the PPP, because the contractor or the partners are responsible for the operations. So, in my opinion, yeah, stage one constitutes a good stage one of Etihad Railway, a good example of PPP, kind of PPP, where there was some value engineering done between the operator and the partners.
Absolutely. I mean, to pick up on the conversations we were having, Joe, what's your views on the value engineering encouragement within PPP? I mean, you've obviously had quite a lot of experience within the PPP models. Do we actively encourage the VE within PPP, or is there the skill sets that are currently available to be able to do that in the region? I mean, you've got some good experience from back in the UK.
So I think, firstly, value engineering is just a process, and it's not a separate standalone item. It's inherent, and it should be embedded within the full P3 or PPP delivery model. From a PPP perspective, if you step back, you take a holistic approach, because you've got a number of stakeholders, a number of parties involved, and they've got a vested interest, not just for building something or not just for operating something, but for the whole life cycle. So the ultimate owner is vested in making sure that he gets the right output at the end. The consortium that's putting together the PPP has a vested interest in making sure that they build the unit or whatever they're building, let's take a wastewater treatment plant or a power unit, as soon as possible, because he won't get paid until it's built.
Yep.
Then he's got to operate it for 20 or 30 years. So he can't build something shoddy and then expect to operate it. So he looks at the whole life cycle as well. So if you get all these partners involved, and they have to look at value engineering. They have to look, and value engineering is not about cost cutting. It's about delivering value, hitting your KPIs, yes, making margin for the developers, but reducing the cost and making sure you can win the job up front. So it's not just cost, it's value. And I think one of the earlier speakers talked about value. It's tangible as well as intangibles. Intangibles such as customer satisfaction, if you're talking schools and hospitals, you've got to put a value to it. And that's when you do value engineering. So you look at the whole life cycle.
Yeah, and I mean, for Barry and Mohammed, when we look at doing value engineering, we look at the basic form of design and build from our previous panel, and we talk about value engineering and saying that, if we're looking at design and build, and we're now accelerating up the development curve in terms of offering in PPP, have we got the skill sets and the experience here and all the way through? I mean, we heard the panelists on the design and build say that you only choose certain types of contractor. I mean, but where have we got gaps? Can we do it here?
I think the answer to that is there is a shortage of skills in the whole industry in every area we look at. And the value engineering process has been discussed by other panelists is holistic. It starts at the beginning and it ends when the building is operating and functional. And if you don't take into account all the factors, then you're not getting value for your money. The issues I found is in any project, whatever it is having a defined brief. What are you trying to achieve? And what are the risks in that? And if you don't define the brief and the risks, the starting point is a bad starting point, and you're going to be introducing other forms of value engineering right throughout the design and construction, which will slow it down and increase the cost. So any process you go into, you need to actually research who are the right people with the experience to do it, in terms of the legal team, the design team, the client's own team, to make sure you're getting the right brief. How is it going to be funded, and what are the benefits, rewards for the people taking part in it? Because in PPP projects, it's different to a design and build, which is different to a traditional design. So define all the risks, define the brief, what you're trying to achieve, and start the VE process before you appoint consultants. That's when it really starts.
Okay, and so, and your view on when's the best time to begin the process? I mean, we were speaking earlier about some experiences of it not working so well. So what lessons learned can we bring to the table on this one?
Look, private-public partnership projects are unique, okay? They are not your typical projects that you are dealing with every day, okay? The culture of how to handle these projects needs to be developed here in the Middle East region, maybe more than the European parts of the world, or because it has been tested and tried before. Public-private partnerships are there to, we have to understand as engineers, we don't always understand the finances, and we don't always understand the legalities, and we don't always understand the various aspects that boil into or emerge into the equation. So we have to understand that there is a public interest at risk. We have to understand that these funds that are being put for a certain project are coming either by direct financing of the governments, or by borrowing through institutions, or borrowing from public entities that are more into funds, such as labor unions, such as your retirement plans, and funds, things of that nature. So the impact of failure is very high.
Yeah.
The impact of failure on the public is felt immediately, okay? So we have to be very careful on how to address the legalities and how to address the contracts that are being done. How do we approach the VE? The VE, I think it's very important when we're talking about PPP. The VE exercise itself begins from day one. Okay, it begins from the day that the inception of the project comes into play, because different methodologies, different ways of trying to deliver the required objective of the project with the lowest cost, and at the same time with managed risks. You have to manage all the risks around it. And you need to make sure that there is a return on that investment and how to maximize it, okay, for the entity that is taking control of that project at the end. Because if it's not going to make money or make a profit to pay off the finance that it borrowed, it's a failed project. And at the end of the day, you find entities suffering after other entities had made their money and gone already, okay? So we have to be very careful on how to define a BB project and how to reach to a successful completion of where all parties are satisfied. Now, when it comes to engineers knowing how finances are done or how legalities are done, or that, this is something that it is expertise that you can find, but it's very limited. That's why I was really impressed today, and as I told you before, that we have a legal entity today sitting on the forum here, because I think the legal entity being there to scrutinize the projects in terms of liabilities, risks, gains, and things like that, and to control the protection of the interest of the stakeholders involved is the key here. No matter what value engineering you do, at the end of the day, if you have some sort of corruption there, or some sort of misuse of that project, we're talking about heavy funds.
Yeah.
We're talking about public projects that are in billions, okay? And there is always that part to be controlled. There is interest in people. Contractors wants to make money. The investors wants to make profit, okay? The public wants a product that works and that can sustain their requirements for a long term, okay? So we have to find that formula that integrates all these together.
I can agree with that completely. And one of the things that it comes back to is David points on maturity of knowledge within the sectors, because what a PPP is designed to do as compared to a straight design and build project is be a life asset for usually a very long term and usually at a very high investment. So if you take the example of a school or a hospital, these are infrastructure developments that are designed to be there for the community for 20 years. And in addition to the more obvious measurables like the design build costs, you have the running costs where, back to the earlier point, it's not efficient to build something at a too low equipment level, because then your maintenance costs or your asset replacement costs will be higher. And similarly, if you take the initial assessment of all the stakeholders, the end user of that project does want to have a positive experience and find that the hospital or the school is running well and has been developed properly. And part of that process is also down to the measurability of success. By that I mean key performance indicators which can be used to either incentivize or also punish the operator. For example, in a school system, you might look at the number of classrooms that are unavailable because of some fault in the lighting or something like that. Take a look at the amount of times that's happened during a month and deduct from the payment over that month's to the contractor. So there are sophisticated measures, but they need to be known.
But it has to have processes to control and to measure and to actually assess these KPIs. And it's always subjective, okay? Yes. It depends on who is doing the assessment. It depends who is carrying out that auditing or the KPI measurement and its results. So again, it's a very tricky process that needs the collaboration of all parties involved, be it the government, be it the private sector, be it the private sector investor, be it the public sector investor, the engineer, all the parties has to be there, has to collaborate in order to come up with the best formula to do this and to monitor it. I believe in the operation and maintenance side, okay, I've been there myself, where we had received projects that by the end of the operation term are useless, and you have to end up with a high bill of replacement cost at the end of the tag to it. I'm coming from a region or a country in the region, which is Jordan, that I can tell you that lots of BBB projects have been done, and unfortunately, okay, most had failed due to the fact that there is no controls, there was no actual legislation put in place to control these, okay? And the one who is suffering is the public, because most of the funds that were invested are public funds that are being misused, unfortunately.
I'm just going to touch on that because I think structure is an important point, and lessons learned is as well. You know, the UK has been through a lot of this, lessons learned. So you don't necessarily need legislation. What you need is a robust contract mechanism that can be adhered to. And that robust contract mechanism can include KPIs, firstly, so that you're sure you're going to get your output, place your incentivizations and penalties in there. What that does is it drives the developer that's putting this thing together to maybe spend more money, invest more money, do more value engineering, because he's driving extra value at the other end. And then have a robust handover procedure at the end. You know, spend a couple of years beforehand. Make sure that the owner understands the assets he's going to take. Make sure it's written up front and clearly defined the performance of the assets that you're going to hand back or the services you're going to hand back. If you can structure all that if you spend enough time up front in a PPP and you put all that in place, then you should be successful. And you know, when you look at lessons learned, that's one of the areas.
If I might add, I think just to add to your statement, sometimes in the VE process, we have sessions to test alternatives. Okay, I think what happens most of the time is most of the alternatives are shot and killed right then and there. Why? Because somebody thinks it's a ridiculous idea. not thinking that a ridiculous thought can be the genius, spark for somebody else. So I think even the silly ideas has to be entertained, has to be looked at, okay, and scrutinized and tested to make sure that we have covered all the alternatives that we can do, okay? Unfortunately, like I told you, we are coming from a region, from a country that we had tested that, okay? We had experienced some failures, and sometimes the failure is because no other options were studied, okay? The VE exercise did not take into account what is the alternatives of that? What is the benefits that I'm reaping, and what is the benefits that might come along with that? What value is added to that project or to that design that I'm doing? Sometimes we just focus on the target at hand and forget what if and how does it perform with others. We end up doing school projects, we end up doing hospital projects, but we forget to assess this hospital project that I'm making as a BBB exercise. How is it going to stand with the private hospitals that are in the area? How is it going to stand with the public-run hospitals already?
Is there a need?
Is there a need, okay? Is there people are interested actually, or investors interested actually in the schools and in the hospital field? Are they more interested in the infrastructure, be it roads and sewer and water treatment or electricity or whatever? Those are with higher returns. These projects are with higher guaranteed returns. So they go into those more. Unfortunately, sometimes these are misused.
But you also make an interesting point, because you keep saying we think about it as an engineers, think about it as an engineers. Now, typically, when we look at value engineering in this region, I wouldn't go as far necessarily always as to say it's cost stripping, but that's often the value engineering workshops I've been to. Now, it's interesting to hear your thoughts about how does that play into the life cycle? Because if you're looking at it from an investor perspective, or as an ownership perspective, certainly in the case of Etihad Rail, the life cycle comes into play a lot more. Now, you spoke about having issues of value engineering skills here. When we move into the O&M side, if we go back to Nicky's introduction, he'd like to see more O&M type tenders across his desk. Do we have that capacity? I'm interested from an asset owner's perspective as much as anything, but also from your perspective of having to value engineer from a high level, Barry. But as an ownership perspective, you've obviously had to take that into account at the front end because you hold the asset.
So I would define value engineering in this kind of context as a fair equilibrium between the interest of the developer, the operator, and the customers. Okay, so we at Etihad Rail have involved the operators in the initial phase, not necessarily the ultimate operator, but what we call the shadow operator, that will play the part of the operator and will defend the operator point of view when the design team are developing the design and the functionalities. We have also very close relations with our customers and partners, and we develop the design in coordination with these persons, because ultimately they are the one who are going to benefit, and they are the one who are going to use our products. Yeah, we see it as a product. So in order to make sure that we have some clear targets, we have MOUs in place, commercial agreement being signed to make sure that we are targeting this level of demand with this level of price. So ultimately, the functionalities and the operation and maintenance are taken into account at the initial phase of the project. And this is the most important thing when we do value engineering. We cannot let one party, being the developer, rule the whole system, or the developer or the customer. So this is why, for me, it's an equilibrium between all the parties.
Okay, well, it's interesting that you speak on equilibrium, because we've seen earlier that the region's moving towards design build, then we sort of talk about the fact that everyone's moving towards PPP. Now, I don't know who would necessarily want to address this, but I suspect you've all had your experiences. Contracting in this region is generally, there's the boss, there's the who's doing, and if you get any upside on value engineering, thank you very much, I'll have that back. So, which of course is not how it works. How do we sort of see it playing out in the region, or is there any examples that we've got readily available as to it's got to be more fair and equitable, as Philly rightly points out. There's a level of risk sharing and
I'll start to answer that if I can.
No, of course.
A couple of points have been made earlier about lessons learned and having the right skills. And as an industry, right across the board, we don't tend to learn lessons. And I've been in construction for over 40 years, and the same problems that occurred 40 years ago are occurring now. And for the same reasons that people don't pass on information and don't share it. And it is an ongoing problem. It's actually made worse now because the use of technology makes the delivery process quicker, but it makes the amount of people at the moment who are capable of using it beneficially are even less.
Yes.
The first project I did when I came to the Gulf was a large university and teaching hospital in Oman, which was probably an early example of a PPP project because it was funded by the UK government, it was design and build, and it was handed over with the contractor operating the facility. I think it was for 5 years. In those days, the number of people involved in the management and setting up of a project was probably about a tenth of what it is now. So there's less people involved, it was easier to communicate, and the communications were much simpler. I went back to Oman 2 weeks ago. I was actually speaking at a conference, and the head of engineering at the university was there. And I had a really interesting discussion with him because the project is now 35, 36 years old. Okay. And he said they hadn't had to change any of the major equipment.
Wow.
Which is quite unbelievable. In those days, the contractor won the project at a good margin, I've got no doubt. He wasn't in competition, so financially, he wasn't being put under pressure. Mm-hmm. I think nowadays, at every level in our industry, we put so much pressure for people to deliver that people are afraid of making mistakes, afraid of making decisions, so everybody backs off and hopes that they can't be pulled in if there's a problem and something goes wrong. And how you can sort of bring all this together and put a successful project and legally cover it, probably hand over to you, Rita, if I can.
Well, I think there is a recognition of a need to change, and we see that just in terms of recent developments. There's a new PPP law in Qatar, there's a new PPP law in Abu Dhabi, and indeed that is coupled, so there's an appetite for shifting from a design and build classic approach to a partnership model. I don't think we're there yet in terms of a shift in the mindset, because very much from most government employers' entities, as with any employer entity within the Gulf, I think the desire is that race to the floor and pushing contractors to take on as much risk as possible. And a successful PPP really seeks to align the risk to that party that is most suitable to bear that risk, that has the capability of doing so, which, if you look at a pass down to the contractor, is not always the case. So I think there's a level of appetite to change that risk profile to a more balanced risk profile. And just looking at the legislative models that are in place, the PPP model should be looked at alongside the, using Abu Dhabi as an example, because I think in this region, certainly it's more advanced, is the Abu Dhabi Investment Office, which in the last 10 years has more than doubled its level of investment in infrastructure projects. And within the last 2 years, since the inception of the new PPP law, has a mandate to look at every project from a role of delivery to consider whether it is suitable for a PPP, and if it is suitable, to consider which PPP model is most appropriate, and where the local participants within the market, by which I mean typically small and medium enterprises, might be involved and engaged in that process. And that comes back to the holistic vision of trying to increase localization within the population on infrastructure projects. It in turn comes into that point of stakeholder engagement and desire for truly successful project in the end that is appropriate in terms of measuring value that is high value for the right cost profile. And I think it also even touches on the earlier sessions where we looked at how technology can be used to influence the success or the perceived success of a project. One of the arms at which the AIO will look at is the measure of successful technology implementation, and I think BIM is already well advanced in terms of being accepted by the contractor consortiums out there, but there are other avenues like artificial intelligence or like streamlining of market participants that have some model of success that will be seen in the next coming years. And touching on the earlier point of level of knowledge within the sector, I think we have to acknowledge that here it's a green market in terms of understanding of the processes and understanding of the measurability, how we measure success, how we consider price as just one element of success. And if we accept that a road from being green and inexperienced to being a mature market like the UK is a long one and challenging one, part of accepting that means that there will be failures along the way.
True. True, but I think even with the experience, I think there is, if you look at the experience, for example, in Greece, in other countries, okay, where they had focused so much on BBB, but they ended up failing, and they ended up with rescue programs, you know, to take them out of that dilemma. There must be a balance. We have to find a balance somewhere, and how much would I target as BBB projects, okay, and how much do I keep as country assets and government assets? You don't want to end up with all your assets being, you know, dumped, you know, in somebody else's hands. You know, I mean, it's like giving your neck. So you need to find that balance and try to play around it. Now, there are some failing examples. There are some successful examples. To go back to the VE aspect of which is our subject today. It is key that the governments or the public sector, before even initiating the tender process for a BBB project, they must do the exercise and they must do the homework.
The assessment of the need.
Exactly. The assessment of the need, the assessment of what do I expect from it and what do I actually need, okay? Limit the needs. Make sure that you are controlling the dreams and wishes that are there, because the more you get into all that, the less focused you are and the more open you are for failure. So you need to understand what your needs are and focus on them and try to capitalize on the best ways to achieve them, okay?
I'm just going to circle back to a couple of points that, you know, you were talking about the O&M and having the O&M engaged. And I think the Etihad Rail example is a great example. One very successful PPP that I know of is in Bahrain with the Maharak scheme.
Okay.
And the novel thing there is that they've got the operator, the DB contractor, and other parties in the SPV. They've all got an equity interest. So because the O&M operator, as well as a contractor, has a vested interest in the success of the consortium as a whole, you know, they're already engaged right at the outset. And that's a very successful model. That works. It's unusual. I've not seen it in many PPPs. But when you can get that early engagement with them,
yep.
It always works. My background in a previous life was an operator, and I don't know how many times the constructor would build something, hand it over to me, and then I'd spend a year fixing it, because I'm going to run it for 20 years. So I'd spend a fortune in the first year, so then I'm secure for the next 20.
Yep.
You know, so you need to get them involved, and it's a great example with Etihad Rail of how they've done that with a shadow operator, and I'd advocate that on, you know, any other project.
So coming back to that lessons learned, sorry, has that been published, the details of the project, the success, and why it was a success? Because people don't know about, if they don't know about why it's a success, they won't follow it. And, you know, the more of this information we can pass on to the industry as a whole, the less mistakes we're going to make.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I was
Philip.
going to say that we have the experience of our, you know, current stage one,
Yep.
where we have a really contractual relation with ADNOC, and where we have yearly KPIs on the number of trains, material to be delivered in a certain time. So all these relations are already in place now in our current railway being operated. So we took benefit of this experience to implement it on the current stage 2, and this is the track we are following also with our new customers, be it the port developers, authorities, and other customers as quarries or.
Yep.
So yeah.
You all three make quite an interesting point really around the lessons learned and the implementation of it. I mean, when and how do we really get the stakeholder engagement going inside this? Because clearly we've got all these lessons learned that are floating around, and you made the point you've been in the business 40 years and we're still doing the same things wrong that we were doing 40 years ago. So how are we going around this? Because value engineering is not going to really work unless we bring lessons learned to the table, because intrinsically that's best practice.
At the end of the day, it brings us back to the same point when she said green. We are still fresh, okay, until this sort of engagements, okay? And the more we venture there, the more we will learn. But again, it's an educational process that everybody needs to actually invest some time and try to understand before trying to venture into something, into the unknown, as they say, okay? I mean, BBB as an idea, okay, it's an idea that is being promoted for a long time now, okay? There is even a UN referendum on it that wants by 2030, okay, that all countries are involved in BBB and having most of their infrastructure programs, okay, done through BBB.
And let's not forget it's a financial need as well.
It's a financial need as well to move the economies or to move the financial sectors. At the end of the day, look, there is benefits, okay, that we cannot ignore, that there are, I don't want to say that there are some hands behind it, okay, pushing for it. It's pushing for it because of the value added it has, because of the benefits it has, and let's not forget, because of the financial institutions that are also promoting that and pushing for it, okay? Because they are making money out of it. Let's be honest. You know, they will be making a profit there. Okay, so there is a move towards BBB. There is a viable benefit out of it. Okay, but again, I have to re-stress, okay, that we have to be careful where we step. Okay, the value engineering again exercise has to be done through the entire life cycle of the project, making sure that the teams that are receiving the project at the end of the day are well trained to operate it, and to operate it in a way that preserves the VE, okay, that was done, and the intent of the project, and not end up with a team that is actually going to demolish of all what have been done, okay? Again, we have to make sure that the contractor is providing a product that is viable to live and to sustain itself for the life cycle intended of the project, to the value intended, and to the best interest of the stakeholders involved.
Agreed.
So I could just raise one more point. In the building industry, the cost of a building is about 17% of its life cycle cost. And people will put a big emphasis on amount of money to be saved, which works out 17% typically of a 25, 30-year life cost. When you've been involved in PPP programs, have you looked at the effect of running the systems or buildings or whatever it might be, and how by spending more money up front? Because I haven't seen anything published or any data readily available, same as data on successes and failures in PPPs.
I'll respond initially. Just yes. I mean, the example I quoted was the Bahrain Maharak one, where the operator was involved. I was actually part of that operations team. Yeah, because if you spend more money on capex, you will save in opex. I mean, that's a fact. When you're a 30-year job, if you put in a simple example, if you put in a standard pump as opposed to a variable speed pump, you're going to save power. You look at that over the full life cycle. So real VE. When you do a VE session, really at the sort of developer level, you need to be looking at your whole life cycle, spend more up front if you can figure out the savings in the long term. And it is it's a pretty standard exercise now for a life cycle cost type approach. I haven't seen much in the way of papers published on it, but I can say that every VE session I've been in relation to a P3 has looked at it from that perspective. Buildings, I mean, you know as well as I do, you can put better lifts in, you can put high efficiency air conditioning. There are different things you can do. And it's just making sure that that discipline is there. There is a danger that people go in and immediately think cost cutting because they're thinking they're going to pay up front.
Yeah.
With a P3, you're getting the money from the lenders for the entire duration, typically. So and you're responsible for the entire duration. So you come in with a different mindset. You're not just thinking my CapEx and nothing else. You're thinking my CapEx and my OpEx. So there is a definite, I've seen the shift from a DBVE to a VE conducted on a PPP basis. It does happen.
And if I could add to what you're saying, there is the CapEx and OpEx in terms of the developers, in terms of operators, and the customers, again. Because you could have a solution that works very well for the developer in terms of CapEx, in terms of OpEx for the operator, but at the end of the day, that doesn't work for the customers. Because it's a solution that requires him to procure a lot of other stuff on his side. So again, it comes back to a kind of equilibrium. On the whole, I mean, taking into account the life cycle cost between all the stakeholders.
Okay, I mean, one final thing really to sort of finish it off. I mean, we talk about being green. We talk about the fact that it's been established for many places and other parts of the world and better to successfully deliver or otherwise. We talk about, pardon me, we talk about not having the lessons learned. Do you think the industry and indeed the region should step back, go and look at, say, Canada or the UK, where we've now seen the successes and failures, and maybe take that and bring it here and put that as part of the execution? Or is indeed it being done in, say, Saudi or Abu Dhabi? I mean, what's your final thoughts on whether or not we should just all take a step back rather than doing the common trick of just charging straight in?
I think we are lucky in this region because we have seen successes, failures elsewhere, okay? And we can take the time and step back a little bit, okay? And actually take the best of the exercises done elsewhere and try to not bring it as it is, okay? And exercise it, no. Test it against our legal form that we have, also test it against our financial system that we have, and make sure that it is robust enough, okay, for us to actually implement in this region and move forward. We are lucky that there are tests that have been done earlier, there are failures, there are successes, and we can actually take a good base from there and start.
I'd agree with that. I think we should learn from other regions. We should recognize the regional nature.
Yes.
So we should regionalize every solution. And then finally, we should also educate. It's so easy to say, right, let's do a PPP, and then everyone just runs into it.
Yep.
Educate, have institutions in place, have a mechanism. People actually understand at the stakeholder level, all the way through, what a PPP is, where the value is, and what are the benefits, and what are the pros and the cons. Where can you fail? Saudi Arabia, for example, has got a great. They've got the National Center for Privatization now, which is like the UN of PPP experts. There's PPP experts from all over the world. They've put together a guidebook. The problem is it's not been rolled out. It's there, it's sat on a shelf, and then the institutions have gone forward, and they're running forward with doing PPPs without looking at the guidebook. And it's an excellent guidebook. It's available for anybody. You can download it and read it tomorrow. That gives you a lot of base knowledge. So I think there needs to be a rollout as well. There needs to be recognition, handhold people in the region, get them to understand it, see the benefits, see the disadvantages, and then move forward. If we just run forward, it's always been a regional thing. We just rush forward with everything. It's hard to take a step back.
I would agree with that. It's things have been done successfully in different parts of the world. If you don't step back and get benefit from them and learn the lessons, you'll just make the same mistakes over again.
Okay, right.